is security, closeness is efficiency. No doubt, those two sentences ringed our ears with a sound of disharmony, if not some sort of dissonances. As if such phrases worthy of George Orwell's dystopian nightmare, described in 1984, hurt our intelligence deeply embedded in this digital world of ours, in which open source and open data are the new moral imperatives. Who would seriously utter those sentences? Who would seriously utter the sentences nowadays without being immediately suspect of living in a Stone Age? I would personally not, although I think that, as any moral imperatives, the logic behind these concepts, such as open source and open data, must be confronted to the reality of our modern world. This is what I intend to do. But before, I would like to make two prior observations. Firstly, I'm deeply convinced that open source and open data are new imperatives that must be considered, if not largely implemented, especially in the public sector. My point is to try to see if they can be put into reality in every circumstances and how. Secondly, I speak as a governmental official. Among my duties, I'm responsible of the organization of the electoral and democratic process in the canton of Geneva in Switzerland. My contribution is largely based on that practical experience in this field. The logic behind the open data movement is based on the fact that the state and the government, like private companies, deal with a multiplicity and an important number of data they collect on a daily basis. At the same time, it is believed that often the state processes this data inefficiently, if it does process it at all. In areas such as transportation, for instance, ministries, regulators, public operators would be, according to this logic, well advised to share the data collected in order to let innovators, hackers, and other geeks create programs, apps, and knowledge that can be developed for the collective welfare. Examples in which innovation and value is created by the wide use of data held by public bodies are numerous. A few weeks ago, I took part in election hack days organized by an open data group and two serious newspapers in Lausanne and Zurich. During 48 hours, about 60 people developed mobile apps using public data available on the internet. One of the projects concerned the next general election, national election, that will be held on 18th of October in Switzerland. The project consisted in providing directly on the mobile phone information pertaining to professional and social links on every candidate to the election. What stands behind this logic? Why is it beneficial for the public and ultimately for the state? First, apart the fact that individuals or groups of individuals process data for the general public at no cost for the state, it introduces innovations that in return can have a positive impact on the government's efficiency. By accepting to share data and knowledge, the government will not only receive added value in return, but the public himself will be co-creator of a public good, increasing the probability that is efficiently delivered and well targeted. Secondly, the logic of transparency and openness behind this trend is a driven force that can significantly increase the government's legitimacy and, in general, the trust into the state and the institutions. It has become pretty obvious today that the top-down approach in managing and implementing public policy is bound to fail, especially in Switzerland, the country of the bottom-up democracy and political process due to the extreme direct democracy. In this context, opening the doors to knowledge and expertise to citizens might help to reduce the crisis that many modern democracies go through, as illustrated by the low level of turnout in elections or referendum. Driving on this idea to openness and transparency are elements of trust and legitimacy to open source movements pleads for the use of programs, apps, and digital systems whose code is published on the internet for everyone to see, to test, and to improve. Electronic voting, or e-voting, is a perfect example of this case. Geneva is the owner of the only e-voting system that is completely owned and developed by the government itself. CH Vote was created, is operated, and owned by the state of Geneva. Like Swiss Watch's slogan, we are innovator by tradition. That's why we have designed our own electronic voting system. Considering the importance of control, security, and trust, the Geneva government decided right from the start, 12 years ago, in 2003, that the only way to proceed was by creating the system internally, therefore not relying or depending on private solutions. In an age in which nations spy on each other with the support of private mega companies, this choice was not only wise, it is essential when it comes to providing a service that is at the core of a democracy, casting a vote. Public ownership of an e-voting system is good, but we can do more. In 2009, the Geneva Parliament passed a law making it possible for any citizen using our e-voting system to access the code of the e-voting system. Until now, it has been accessed twice upon request, once by the Pirate Party, who looked at the code 3 months during, and once by academics. But it's still not enough. And this is why the Geneva government submitted to the Parliament 1 month ago a law that will make it possible and compulsory to publish the code on the internet for everyone to see, to test, and to improve. Why is it so important? Because, again, legitimacy, especially when it comes to the democratic process, can only be reinforced by transparency and openness. Who would accept today a hyper-sophisticated program dealing with ballots and votes is not accessible to the public for reasons of ownership or business considerations of a private company? In many countries, the ballot box is transparent. Why should the e-ballot box be different? After the reign of secrecy and closeness, a security condition of technological systems, there comes the age of transparency and openness. Transparency is security, openness is efficiency. Is that it? Is the discussion closed? Have we definitely got rid of secrecy and closeness? Certainly not. We mainly have inversed the paradigm, but one question remains. Are there still subjects, processes, or data that continues to need secrecy and closeness? Again, the democratic process is an interesting example. At the core of democracy lies the idea that a citizen's vote must be kept secret. And in the absence of this secrecy, it can be rightfully suspected that the vote is not free. Therefore, when organizing electoral processes, and even more so when electronic voting is used, the government must publish the source code, but at the same time design the security process that renders it impossible for anybody to link the citizen to his vote, thus ensuring that secrecy of the vote is not in jeopardy. In e-government, the trend today is to develop systems that provide each citizen with a unified electronic identity, or EID. in order of facilitating the online interactions with the government and its administration. You can see now that, although this trend is legitimate, it does pose a real problem when it comes to electoral process, like the example of Estonia. As much as transparency is crucial in such matters in terms of legitimacy and security of the electoral process, this principle cannot be implemented when it comes to the secrecy of vote. This leads me to the 3 conclusions. First, when it comes to processes and complex digital systems, such as e-voting, transparency and openness are indeed necessary and mandatory to increase security and trust. Second, some of these processes and systems should not be left to private companies. Public control and open source are required to guarantee legitimacy and security. Third, and finally, if the scope of secrecy and closeness must be considerably reduced, let us not conclude too quickly that we are done with these concepts. If we do, we might as well end up with a big brother. George Orwell thought it might be the state, but it could well be private. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anja. I particularly enjoyed the 1984 references in your presentation. So the Obama administration started an initiative called OpenGov Initiative very early on in its administration. And one of the first things that it did was, of course, try to get as much data as possible out there. Now, for different reasons. This was really to try to drive commercialization of government data in new and maybe interesting uses. And one of the first things that they heard, which I thought was very interesting, was if you want to make your data searchable, you need to take it out of PDF form. And so that was one of the lessons learned very early on in the government, and they've now open.gov, I think, or open.gov, yes, I think is the name of the website, has a lot of open data available for that commercialization. So you've had much experience then with the e-voting. What other areas would the open data help in, or have you found in Geneva and in Switzerland that open data has helped?
Well, we are not so far than in the States about open data. We are still in the Stone Age, kind of. but definitely it's very useful, and it started to be used in the transportation sector, which I think it's one of the easiest ways. They are not very private or sensible data, and it's very easy to make value to the citizens. But I think the open source, it's really even more important than open data. Open data creates value, but open source in some sensitive systems, it's just necessary. Otherwise, if an e-voting system, it's not open source, you shouldn't do it. I wouldn't like to do it. It's too dangerous.
Well, thank you very much. We do appreciate your perspective. So carrying on the theme of data, I thought we would move next to Jørgen Abel Andersen.